Well, hello, this is Vincent Green. I wanted to come and teach lesson 2 of Greek grammar to you in our textbook on Machen, New Testament Greek. In lesson number 1, we covered the alphabet. We covered different, the diphthongs, different how vowels are made and how two vowels together can form, and then other marks, other kind of marks that you would find, other kind of like punctuation marks, other kinds of things that you're going to find in the reading of the Greek New Testament. One of those was accents. Now, these were briefly mentioned back in lesson 1. Um, Under number 6 there in lesson 1, where it said there are 3 accents: the acute accent, the circumflex accent, and the grave accent. And so in lesson number 2, we're going to really work through this. Now, most grammars these days, modern grammars, I would say, are, well, modern editions of New Testament Greek grammar, uh, really just skip this. They don't really talk about this too much. And so it's something that I want you to be aware of. I really want you to kind of work through if you're able to. I do want to spend some time on this. I don't want to minimize it because it can help you in terms of kind of getting more confidence. Even though you're reading Greek, pronunciation of Greek is not the primary thing. We're care about translation, but the more things that would help you build confidence in reading the Greek and actually attempting to pronounce it correctly, anything that would help in that is going to build more confidence. And when you have more confidence, it's going to help you in translation down the road. So this is something that needs to be taught. There is actually a book you can get. I can't think of the name. I think it's Greek Accents or something like that. Where it goes into much, much, much more detail. But this lesson will be sufficient. And at this point, I don't know if I'll finish this lesson in one video. This may be a two-part thing, but I do want to present all of this to you. I want to have it on video so that you could work through this if you so desire. And so let's begin. So I'm just going to walk through this and kind of try to explain what we're doing here. Now, the Greek accents indicated in ancient times, in the times in which, let's say, Christ lived, the time in which the apostles lived, the early church, they didn't emphasize stress, what we call accent, but it was actually musical pitch. But since it is impossible for us to reproduce the original pronunciation of New Testament Greek, there were no tape recorders, no no cell phones to be able to record a voice memo or anything like that back in those days. So we really have no way of reproducing exactly the original pronunciation of Koine Greek. The best we can do is to actually place the stress of the voice upon the syllable where the accent occurs. So the accent mark, as we learned in lesson 1, shows up over a syllable. So it could be a vowel by itself um, in that syllable, or it could be a diphthong in that syllable. So you just have to be aware that it's going to show up over the vowels. And a diphthong is a combination of two vowels that really make one vowel sound. So just be aware of that. And give up on trying to make any distinction in pronunciation between the acute accent, the circumflex accent, and the grave accent. So, having adopted this method of pronunciation, we should adhere to it pretty rigidly. So, wherever the accent shows up, no matter where it shows up, and no matter which of the 3 kinds that are visible to us, we place the stress on that syllable. So, for unless some one method is adhered to, the language can never be fixed in the memory. That's what learning about accents is. That's what we're attempting to do, is to help get more of the language fixed into your memory so that you're more confident of what you're looking at when you're actually looking at a Greek New Testament. It is also important to learn to write the accents correctly, since the accents serve to distinguish various forms from one another and are therefore a great help and not a hindrance in learning the language. I think some people, just totally avoid accents altogether, or the study of accents for the Greek language, because they think, well, this is just a hindrance. This is just something I don't need it. But actually, it can be a help to you, a great help if you think about it. And so we want to deal with it. So one of the things you have to learn first is that every word has syllables. And so when we talk about syllables, um, I've explained about, I think, you have these syllables that are consonant, vowel, consonant, or consonant, vowel. You have these syllables, and these words are divided into syllables, and that affects how you understand and work with knowing where the accent should go. And so there was a system in place. It wasn't just haphazard. The Greeks, when they spoke, uh, had an understanding of where these accents marks would go on these words, and there was a reason for it, and so we just want to be aware of that. So this is how we need to start in our study of the accents. We need to understand the terminology of the syllables. So so when you have a word, any word, it could have one syllable. It could be a two-syllable word, a three-syllable word, four-syllable word. I mean, maybe even five-syllable word. But when it comes to accents, the last three syllables is the most important. The last three syllables are the most important, and so the last syllable of a word is called the ultima. The one before that is called the penult, and the one before that is the antepenult. So when you start at the end of the word, so think of lambanomen, lambanomen. You'll notice that that's an acute accent mark. It's placed on a vowel, and so there are multiple syllables in lambanomen. And so the ultima is the words men, so there. So we're working from the end of the word going backwards. So mu, epsilon, nu is the ultima, the final syllable. The penult, which is the one before that, is the nu omicron. And then the antepenult is the beta alpha. So there is a fourth syllable, lambda, alpha, mu, but in terms of accents, we don't care about that. So we want to think about the final three syllables of a word. Now, if a word doesn't have three syllables, if it only has two, then it only has the antepenult and the penult. It doesn't have the ultima. So, but for the sake of getting started, getting some preliminary definitions down, we want to be aware of this ultima, which is the last syllable of the word, the penult, which is the one before that, and the antepenult, the one before that one. So syllables containing a long vowel and or a diphthong, because diphthongs are long. If the syllable contains a long vowel or a diphthong, then that syllable is long. Now, if the final syllable is alpha iota or omicron iota, they're considered short so far as accent rules are concerned. So again, these are diphthongs, but by its very nature, those are short, not long. Basically, all diphthongs are long, just by its very nature, having two vowels put together, except for these two. There is these exceptions. So, think of this. Thus, the last syllable of anthropos is long because it contains the diphthong omicron upsilon. You see it there? That's a regular diphthong. It's not one of these two. The last syllable of anthropoi is short. Why? Because even though it's a diphthong, it's one of these two, and that is by definition short vowel. So that makes the syllable short. So not only do you need to know the three types of syllables, the ultima, the penult, the antepenult, not only do you need to know that, you need to know if the syllable is long or short, especially the final syllable, the ultima. That's the one you need to make sure that you are thinking about. So the last syllable of anthropois. Now that one's long because even though it's Omicron iota, it's not final Omicron iota. See, the rule is final, meaning it has to be the final word or the final letters in the word. Here, there's that sigma. So it's long because it has a letter after it, and so not being the final Omicron iota is long, like any other diphthong. So you have to just understand these things, that this is some preliminary terminology that you have to be aware of. Now, it will be remembered that epsilon and omicron are always short. Eta and omega are always long. So the quantity, long or short, of the other ones, alpha, iota, upsilon, remember they could either be long or short. We learned this back in lesson 1 under the vowel chart. You have to learn by observation in individual cases if it's short or long. So these are just some preliminary remarks that kind of get us started in working through the idea of the accents and where the accents go. Now, what we're trying to work towards is, number one, there's 3 types of accents, right? We have to figure out where do they appear, on which syllable. Is it the ultima? Is it the penult or antepenult? Which syllable do they show up as, and which accent shows up? Which of the 3? So that's the part of this lesson which becomes everything. It's trying to answer that question. So you have to think of it this way. There are what we call general rules of accent. These apply to every single word, no matter what type of word it is, no matter if it's a noun or a verb. But after we work through the general rules, then there's going to be specific rules that relate to verbs. Then there's going to be specific rules that relate to nouns. So you have to think the general rules apply to everything, but then you have more specific rules for verbs and nouns. And this is, looking at all of these rules, that's what discourages the majority of Greek students, New Testament Greek students, to not even deal with this. And it can be daunting. But I remember when I took Greek for the first time, our professor that I had, he went through this same chapter, this same lesson with me, or with the entire class. And he spent a couple of days talking about all of this. We worked through all of it, and I decided that if I really wanted to learn Greek, I want to know everything, as much as I can. I want to have a total confidence that I can read this, that I can read the New Testament, that I can translate the New Testament. And he told me, or he told the class, he said, because we had quizzes and worksheets and exams, we had the whole thing. I was taking this in Bible college back when I was in my 20s, and I'm 55 now, about ready to be 56. And so it's been many years. And I just remember him saying that I'll never put this on a test. I'll never make it so that you have to know this material. But I want to present it to you so that you're aware of it. And so I took the time to sit down and try to learn it and work through it. And that's one reason why I'm making this video. Working through it to give you an opportunity to work through all of this at your own pace and try to work through it. You don't have to try to be an expert in all this or memorize every rule. It's more you kind of get the sense of it. You work with some of the words and try to figure it out, and then go from there. And you build more confidence as you go along in working through this. So that's why I want to present this. So let me just deal with the general rules of accents. The general rule of accent. I think in this video, what I'm going to do is talk about the general rules of accent, and then we're going to deal with the verbs. And then the next video, I'll do a little bit of review, and then we'll get into the nouns, because there's differences between verbs and nouns in terms of how accent marks are placed on whichever syllable. So let's start with the general rules. The acute accent, which is formed in this way, can stand only on one of the last three syllables of a word. So you could have an acute on any of the three, the ultima, the penult, or the antepenult. The circumflex can only be on one of the last two. So you'll never see a circumflex on the antepenult. You have to work back, start at the end of the word. The ultima, the penult, and the antepenult could have the grave on either one. And there's not like you can have three accent marks. There's only one accent mark per word, okay? But which syllable will it be on? And so the acute can show up on the last three. The circumflex can only show up on the last two. The grave can only show up on the final one. So if the accent mark is on the final syllable, there's a good possibility it could turn into a grave. We'll talk about that later. Now, however, this rule would be violated by apostolos, for here the accent would stand on the fourth syllable from the end. It would also be violated by pistu amen, for here the circumflex would stand on the third syllable from the end. So there are some exceptions to the rule. That's one thing you want to be aware of. There are some exceptions to that rule, and so we'll deal with that as we go. But by and large, these are, again, general rules. Doesn't mean it may apply in all cases, but all things being equal. That's why these are called general rules. We'll deal with specific rules for nouns, or specific rules for verbs and nouns as we get farther into this. But generally speaking, we're talking just general rules here. Now, the circumflex accent cannot stand on a short syllable. So if you do have the circumflex, it has to be the long syllable, not a short syllable. If the ultima is long, the antepenult cannot be accented at all. And the penult, if it is accented at all, must have the acute. So examples like, now Rule 3a would be violated by apostolo or apostolou, because in these cases the ultima is long, but it is not violated by apostole and apostoloi, because here the ultima is short. So you have a short ultima. Here it's long, and omega is long. So, and why do you have these exemptions to the rule, to the general rule? Because of specific rules related to nouns, and which we'll get to. All these words here, this is from apostolos, this is from doulos, that means slave. You'll learn that word as we go. This one is apostolos, meaning messenger or angel. Word for apostle. I'm sorry, not angel, but a word for messenger or apostle. So that, or this is like sent one, not really messenger. Sorry, I mixed up my words. So apostolos is apostle or sent one. It's angelos, which is messenger or angel. So we'll learn those words as we go. But these are nouns, and that's why these are nouns have a specific kind of rule attached to them, as we'll learn in the next video. And so you have to deal with specific rules, but we start with general rules. Okay, if the ultima is short, a long penult, if it is accented at all, must have the circumflex. Now, again, this rule can be violated by douloi, but it's not violated by doulou, because here the ultima is not short, or by weos, that's the word for son, because here, although a long penult comes before a short ultima, the penult is not accented at all. So the rule does not say that a long penult before a short ultima must have the circumflex, but only that if it is accented at all, it must have the circumflex rather than some kind of other accent. So again, these are the general rules. When you get to specific rules, then you can actually figure out, you can start the process of understanding where accents show up. A long ultima can have either the acute or the circumflex. So, a del fu and a del fu both conform to the general rule. However, further observation based on the other considerations is necessary in order to tell which one's correct. You can't, even though they say this is a possibility, only one is correct. Only one is what you're actually going to see in the Greek New Testament. So when we get to specific rules, then that's when you really know how these are formed. Number 6 here. An acute accent on the last syllable of a word is changed to the grave when followed without intervening marks of pronunciation by other words in the sentence. This is where you find the grave. So like adelphos is right where adelphos stands by itself. But if you had adelphos apostolou, that violates the rule. The way it's going to show up in the Greek New Testament is the grave can only be on the final syllable. So if it normally would be an acute, if it's by itself, you switch it to grave if there's another word following it. So whenever you see the grave accent in the Greek New Testament, it's because that it's on the last syllable and there's a word right after. Okay? That's why you would see the grave. Remember, there's 3 different possibilities of accent marks. 3 different possibilities. And you want to be aware of all 3 of those and when those can show up in terms of a syllable of a word. Now, it should be observed that these general rules of accent do not tell what the accenting of any individual word is to be. We haven't got to that yet. The specific rules for verbs and nouns is what tells us that. They only tell us what it cannot be. So when we're going through like the rules of nouns, or I mean the rules that relate to verbs, let's talk about that. When we go through the rules that relate to verbs, then that's going to tell us where it can be and when it can be and all that, where it can show up. But we got to make sure that in the process we're not violating the general rules, okay? If at all possible. What the general rules do is they merely fix certain limitations within which the accenting of Greek words must remain. What the accent actually is within these limits can be determined in part by the special rules, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But in very many cases, we must learn by observation of the individual words. Now, one of the things you're going to, if you follow through with this lesson, is that you're going to have some words that have no accent marks on them, and you're going to be asked to put an accent mark on it. Well, that is just for the sake of you learning the rules, okay? Having the rules fixed in your memory by trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. That's how this works, okay? Just so you know, the reality is that when you're reading the Greek New Testament, all the accent marks are already placed. They're already showing up. And so you're like, wait a minute. If they're already showing up, why do I need to learn these rules again? It helps you get more confidence. At the end of the day, it's not that you're going to compose Greek words and Greek prose. You're not going to be doing that kind of thing. We will have assignments starting in lesson 3 where you have English text and you want to translate English to Greek. You want to go backwards. And so when you do that, it gives you an opportunity to practice the accent markings and see if you're getting it right. See if you're getting it correctly. And so that's how you build more confidence, is that as you do the reverse assignments, there'll be lessons where you translate Greek text to English. But then you go backwards. You go from English to Greek. And when you do that, it forces you to know not only what the words are and what and how the words are formed, but it helps you understand the meaning of the words. It helps you to understand you can even work towards the accents and putting the accents in the right place. So again, you're going to have ample opportunity to work on accents as we go forward in all of our lessons. Um, Again, I just want to take you through all of this. So these general rules, all they do at this point is tell us what it cannot be, where the accent cannot show up. Where it actually does show up, we have to apply specific rules. Thus, if we have a form like lu amanoi or lu amanu to accent, say there's no accent, where's the accent go? The general rules would permit one of the three possibilities. It could be lumanu, lumanu, or lumanu. Do you see how I changed my pronunciation? Lumanu, where did I put my stress? Final syllable. Lumanu, same stress, even though there's different accent marks. That's the acute, that's the circumflex. But lumanu, see, I accented that syllable. So wherever the accent shows up, that's where you would stress the pronunciation of the word. So the general rules tell us that it can be on any of those three, but it can only be one. So we need specific rules to help us out, to figure out which of these three possibilities is the actual case. Any other way of accenting would violate the general rules, so it can only be these three options for that particular word. But which of the three possibilities is actually to be chosen is a matter for further observation. What if we have a form prosopon to accent? There's no accent mark there. Well, the general rules would permit another three options: prosopon, prosopon, or prosopon. So you see, based on the different accents, they're on different syllables, so you would pronounce those different ways. So the general rules give you limitations, but they don't tell you all the answers. That's why we need the specific rules. So there are two special rules which help to fix the accent mark of many words more closely than it is fixed by the general rules. The general rules only give us possibilities, but the specific rules nail it down to which is the correct form in every given case. So there is the specific rules for verbs, and like I said, there's the specific rules for nouns. So in this video, I just want to focus on the verbs and work with that a little bit so that we're aware of these things, okay? So here we go. When you think about verbs, and we're going to be working through some of these. I'm going to show it to you on the screen here in just a little bit. When we have verbs have recessive accents, okay? Verbs have recessive accents. We don't want to forget that. What does that mean? It means that the accent, if you start at the end of the word, the accent mark's trying to go all the time. It's trying to get to the antepenult. It wants to be on the antepenult, the antepenult, the antepenult. It wants to go back as far as it can. Now, sometimes it can't go back that far because of the general rules, but it wants to go back that far. That's what it means by recessive. So the rule means that in verbs, the accent goes back as far as the general rules of accent will permit. This rule definitely fixes the accent of any verb form. It is not necessary to know what verb the form is derived from or to have any other information whatever about the verb. Just when you look at the verb, that's all you got to look at is the actual form of it. Now we're going to learn in lesson 3, lesson 4 about different forms of verbs, or well, lesson 3, what different forms are. Lesson 4 and 5, we go to nouns. So lesson 3, we're going to deal with verbs. And so we just want to be aware of that. Knowing that it is a verb form, one needs only to look at the ultima. If the ultima is short, an acute must be placed on the antepenult, supposing the word to have as many as 3 syllables. If the ultima is long, an acute must be placed on the penult. So here we go. If the ultima is short, an acute must be placed on the antepenult. So we're looking at the ultima, the final syllable. If it's short, meaning it has a short vowel, then you place the acute accent on the antepenult. but the word has to have that many syllables for it to be able to do that. If the ultima is long, so this is the criteria. You're looking at the ultima. If it's short, then this happens. If the ultima is long, an acute must be placed on the penult. So the antepenult is the third syllable from the back, from the end of the word going backwards. The penult is two going backwards. So here's some examples. Suppose we have the verb form egenosku. Where's the accent mark? It's not showing up. Okay, but we need to put the accent mark on there. Well, in accordance with the rule of verb accent, the accent is trying to get as far back as the general rules of accent will permit. So, but if we put it here, egenosku, that violates rule number 1. What was rule number 1? Rule number 1 was the acute can only be on the final 3 syllables, not the 4th. So, it can't be that. Well, since the ultima is long, right? Omicron upsilon is a diphthong, so it's long. We can't have it here over this iota because that's the 3rd syllable, because it can only be on the 3rd syllable if the ultima is short. So that would violate rule 3a. Therefore, the penult must be accented. But if we put the circumflex over it, that would violate rule 3b. Therefore, that one's long. It has to go on the penult, which is here's the next syllable over, the penult, and it has to be an acute. If the ultima is long, an acute must be placed on the penult. Therefore, egenosku is correct. I'm trying to stress that pronunciation. On the other hand, if a verb form, here we got another one, eskenoske, is to be accented, okay? Although egenoske is forbidden by rule number 1, we still can't put it over on the epsilon. Egenoske is permitted because that's the antepenult. Remember the rule here? If the ultima is short, an acute must be placed on the antepenult. So we're looking here. Final syllable. Final syllable is short. So we go back to the antepenult. That's permitted. And since verbs have recessive accent, that accenting egenoske is correct. And egenoske or egenoske would be wrong. The general rules allow all 3, but the specific rules allow only this one right here. Now, what about if a verb has only 2 syllables? Then rule 4 of the general rules come into play. Thus, if you have a verb called soze, that's the word for salvation. Well, if it's short, which it is, right? It wants to go to the antepenult, but there's no antepenult. How do you, if the final syllable, final vowel there, short, so we have, there's the ultima, there's the penult, but where's the antepenult? There's no antepenult. So it has to have an accent, so what do we do? The rule of recessive verb accent decrees that the former of the 2 syllables shall be accented. But rule 4 decrees that the accent cannot be an acute, it has to be circumflex. So again, for verbs, the accent is going to always either be on the antepenult or the penult. Antepenult or the penult. And you look at the ultima. You look at the syllable, the vowel that's in the syllable, called the ultima syllable, which is the final syllable in a word or in a verb, and you look to see if that syllable, if the ultima has a short vowel, then go back to the antepenult. If it has a long vowel, then you go back to the penult and put an acute accent. If it has a short vowel, but there's no antepenult, then we go back to the penult. And Rule 4 says that if the ultima is short and the penult is long, if it's going to be accented, that has to be the circumflex. Now, if that was a short vowel, then it would be an acute. But if it's long vowel, that vowel is long, and you have to put the accent mark on it because there's no antepenult, then you put the circumflex. So how would we like to do some examples? Think so. Let me see if I can give you some examples, and we will work through some of these. Okay? So let me make sure my thing is working here. Yep. Okay. Okay. Okay, let me give you some forms here and let's see what happens. So, okay. Gamma, rho, alpha, V, epsilon, tau, epsilon. So, here we have te, fe, and gra. So this is the ultima, U for ultima, P for penult, and antepenult. Okay? So, I got to look at the ultima. I got to ask myself, is it short or is it long? That's the question. Always when I'm looking at verbs to figure out where to put the accent mark, I need to find out if it's short or long. So I look at the ultima and I look at the epsilon, and I know that the epsilon is always short. Okay? So if this is short, then it's trying to go back to the antepenult. Short equals antepenult. Okay? Well, let me just do it this way. A P. Make that simple. Okay. So since it's short, it doesn't go here because that's the penult, and it's got to go over the letter that is the vowel. So it's going to be an acute right here. So short equals an acute on the antepenult. Does that make sense? I look here and I go back. Since it's short, I go back here. That's what the specific rule says, and so I follow that. Let me do another one. lambda, omicron. Oh, misspelled. Lambda, missed one letter. Upsilon, omicron, another upsilon, sigma, and iota. Now, this sigma, remember it's not final sigma because there's another letter. So we have sigma, and so when I have it, so I'm looking at, so it's C is my ultima syllable, oo is my penult, and that's actually a diphthong. And so then I have antepenult here. So is this short or long? Well, iota is short. So that since this ultima is short, it wants to go back and put the acute on the antepenult. Okay? That's how this works. Now, let me give you this one. Same word, nope, different word. Thought it was the same word. Different word. Lambda, a lambda, epsilon, gamma, epsilon, iota. So now I have, this is my ultima, because it's a diphthong. And then you got leg. So this is the penult. Well, look out here. There's no antepenult. But notice this. The ultima, is it long or short? All diphthongs except for alpha, iota, final, alpha, iota, and omicron iota, those would be short if they show up at the final, the last of the word. If they show up at the very end, no letters after them, as the idea of final. And so since this is a diphthong, but it's long, this is a long diphthong, then long ultima means go back to the penult and put an acute. So it's lege, lege, lege. Is how that one would work. So let me give you another one. Epsilon, key, epsilon, iota, final sigma. See, there's the final sigma, right? So this one has the breathing mark. But where's the accent go? Well, it's ek, ace is the two different syllables. So here's the diphthong, that's the vowel. So that's my ultima. And then here I have a penult, but again, no antepenult. But here, notice, is that's a diphthong, is it long or short? It's long. So a long diphthong means that it's a long syllable. So I come back here and I put this over the vowel. And notice when I have a breathing mark, the breathing mark always comes before the accent. That's one thing you'll find is the breathing mark comes before the accent if they're going to both be on the same letter. See how this works? That's one of the things you want to be aware of in terms of how this works. And so let me see if I can give you one more or so. Here's one. This will be the final one to give you. Okay. Delta, iota, delta, alpha, sigma, kappa, omicron, mu, epsilon, theta, and then another alpha. Okay, let's think about this. So here we have, this is our ultima. Sorry, no, not there. Tha. So theta, alpha, that's our ultima. And then me is our penult. And then we have co. That's our antepenult. So we have other syllables out here. Didaskometa. Didaskometa. 5-syllable word. But when it comes to accents, we're only worried about the last 3, not these 2. See? The accent's going to come in one of these. So we look at the ultima. It's an alpha. That means it's short. So we go back to the penult and then go back to the antepenult, and we put the acute there. Didaskometa. Didaskometa. So you see how we figure that out. Even though you may have longer words that have more syllables, this is a 5-syllable word, we only care about the final 3 syllables. And so the rule states, if we know if it's long or short, then we go back. Either here, if this is long, we go back here. If this is short, we go back here. Now that's just in regards to verbs. When we deal with nouns, there's different special rules or specific rules. And that's what we're going to deal with next time. So let me close this part out. I want to show you this. If you go here to the bottom of the exercises, write the following verb forms with the accent and then pronounce them. So there is the didaskometa, and the final alpha is short. So because alpha could be short or long, he tells us that it's short. So it goes back to the omicron there, like we did in the example. So you could work through these 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. In the video description box below, I'm going to have a picture for you, a link that'll take you to a picture where you can see the, where you'll be able to see the kind of the answers. You'll be able to see the answer key to this. And so you can check yourself, okay? So don't worry about right now, don't worry about the nouns. That's separate. That's a different thing, okay? But you can work through this right now. And at this point, don't worry about number 3 here until we're fully done. So if I'm going to be making another video that will deal with the nouns. We'll talk about accenting nouns. We still keep the general rules, but we talk about nouns, and that's a totally different thing. So verbs are the ones that are recessive. So you want to go back through and read through the general rules, kind of work through them in your mind, work through the specific rules of verbs, and then work on some of these here as examples, and try to figure those out. You can also go to lesson 3. Lesson 3 is a lesson that we're going to deal with in terms of translation, talking about the verbal system. But if you go down here to the exercises, especially these right here, now you'll notice that these already have the accent marks placed on them. You could look at these and ask yourself, okay, why does the accent mark show up here? And try to figure it out based on the rules related to verbs. Okay? So this is something you could just try to think through. You don't have to write anything on a piece of paper, but you could work through this as well. Lesson number 3 in terms of the accent marks. And so again, most people would say, I'm not even going to deal with all of this. Why deal with all of this? But the more you are familiar with these things, the better you're going to be in terms of the confidence you're going to have in terms of studying the New Testament in Greek, being able to translate eventually the Greek New Testament, being able to understand more of what's going on and get into the understanding of how they spoke to each other and how they interacted with each other, especially in terms of conversation. Remember, this is the common language that was spoken by everybody there. So you want to be aware of this and work through that. Next time, in our next video, we'll start here with noun accents. I'll probably give a little bit of a review, but that's what we will do. Okay? Okay. Well, let me pray for us, and then we'll be done. Lord, we thank you for this time to be able to look at these rules of accent. Lord, this may seem so obtuse to many. Maybe people are asking, why would we even try to learn this? But Lord, we know that the more familiar we are with the Greek language, the more we can translate from the original Greek, and the more we will understand of what's happening and what's going on. So Lord, please help us in learning this language and learning all the various aspects of it. And Lord, we just give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. So anyway, take care, and in the next video, we'll talk about noun accents. I'll work through that and then give you some examples of that as well. And then after that, we'll go into lesson number 3. So again, in the video description box, there's going to be a lot of links for you to various things, and just check that out. And those will be things that can be helpful to you. Okay? Take care. We'll see you in the next video.